Hello there. My name is Todd Latham, and I'm the publisher of Renew Canada and president of Actual Media. Welcome to today's webinar, INFRAIntelligence webinar. This is the second in our series, and it's going to be on green infrastructure and valuing natural assets. We've got a great panel together today, obviously sponsored by Alice. Thank you very much to our friends at Alice for supporting this event and giving us the opportunity to talk about green infrastructure and natural assets. Before we get started, I just want to introduce everybody to the platform. As you can see, I'm on screen. There'll be others joining us. Our speakers will be on screen shortly. And at the bottom, you'll see Ask a Question. That's your opportunity to post a question to us, and I will then moderate that. Along the right-hand side, you're seeing people popping in with chat. Feel free to pop in there as well and say hello, introduce yourself, so we all know who's in attendance. We've got a good crowd here today, and there will be follow-up on this webinar in Renew Canada and online. And of course, we've got lots of good things to talk about. But before I introduce my speakers, I just want to acknowledge many First Nations and Indigenous people of Canada as the original stewards of our natural infrastructure. I'm in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. So thank you very much to our First Nations who have brought us this far, and we continue to acknowledge the green infrastructure that we're working on and we'll be discussing today. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing our speakers. So first up is Lara Ellis. She's with Alice, and she is going to introduce herself a little more completely. I'm not going to do the whole bio thing here, but as we get all the speakers on, we'll let them have a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. So Lara Ellis from Alice. Next would be Stephen Peck from Green Roofs for Healthy Cities, and we'll be bringing them on screen shortly. We'll just let our folks in the back end start bringing everybody on screen. Lara Ellis, Stephen Peck, Bailey Church of KPMG, and France Gertin of Dow. And I promise you there are other speakers coming. There's France. Hello. And there's Bailey. Stephen. Now we're just waiting for Lara. But maybe you guys were waiting for Lara. We'll do the reverse order. France, why don't we have you do an intro of who you are and where you're from, and we'll wait for Lara to join us soon.
Bonjour. Well, very happy to, as I said before to my colleagues, speakers, traveling to Canada, where my hometown was in Gatineau, Quebec. So virtually, I'm super happy to be on Canadian soil. Looking forward to finally be able to cross the border when everything settles down. My role, I work for Dow. I started in Dow Canada. Just a bit of background, Dow is a global material science company. We have assets in 109 different sites in 31 countries. My specific role is with the Global Environmental Technology Center, where I lead one of our newest technology pillar, which is around engineered natural technology. And that's kind of our internal terminology for green infrastructure. So really excited to be here and look forward to this discussion.
Thanks, France. We had Lara up there momentarily. She's now popped out again, but we'll keep going. Over to you, Bailey, in terms of introduction. Quick. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Todd, and great to join you all from snowy Ottawa. My name is Bailey Church. I'm a partner with KPMG. I lead our public sector accounting advisory service line for Canada, where I work with a lot of municipalities and all levels of government on different complex issues. A lot of my background has been in environmental liabilities, dealing with contaminated sites and nuclear waste and all kinds of other issues and how those get accounted for, which led me to a real passion for green infrastructure, because our standards are great at recognizing the liabilities and the costs, but we're not so great at recognizing the benefits. So I'm thrilled to be here to chat about with you all today.
Thanks, Bailey. And Stephen, and Lara, we'll go to you last to summarize and introduce. Stephen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Peck. I'm the founder and president of Green Roofs for Healthy Cities. We're a US-based nonprofit industry association that has been working for the past 22 years to develop the green roof industry across North America and to some extent around the world. I'm also the co-founder of GEO, Green Infrastructure Ontario, which is a network of organizations, both associations and non-governmental organizations and conservation authorities that have been working to improve support for and financing of green infrastructure in the province of Ontario as a means of dealing with climate change and improving the resilience of our communities. I've done a lot of work on the valuation of green infrastructure, the methodologies involved, and through an organization called the Green Infrastructure Foundation, also based in the United States, a charitable organization. We've been conducting charrettes with communities across the United States and Canada where we re-envisage an area within the community with different types of green infrastructure. We do a design of what that might look like with community members and experts and government officials. And then we subject that to a cost-benefit analysis so people can leave with a concept and a vision, but also some of the hard numbers that are required to get to implementation. So delighted to be here. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you, Stephen. And Lara, thanks for joining us. Now over to you for final introductions.
Hopefully I'm here to stay. Not sure what happened there. So ALIS stands for Alternative Land Use Services. We work with farmers and ranchers, and we restore, enhance, and conserve natural infrastructure. So wetlands, grasslands, woodlands, riparian buffers, planting trees. That's the sort of thing that we do across Canada in 30 different communities. Working with farmers is important when we're looking at natural infrastructure because collectively they make up the largest private landholder in the country. We've got 2 natural infrastructure pilot projects where we're looking at quantifying the benefits, mainly water-related benefits of the work that we do in terms of water quality and quantity. So mitigating flood, but also reducing the cost of water. The problems that we have in Canada are exacerbated by climate change, but land use change over the past 100 years or so has really created problems that we can partially rectify through the restoration of natural infrastructure. So happy to be here today. I'm really excited about hearing from my fellow panelists.
Excellent. So that's everybody. So thank you all for being here again as speakers. We've got a lot of really great questions already starting off. But the first one, and it came up in the green room earlier as we were getting ready for this, is defining green infrastructure. I think in one of our other series, we talked about defining blue economy and what that means. And I think it's important now to get started today for each of you to maybe define what is green infrastructure. Who wants to start?
I can take the starting line. So we for Dow's purpose, our journey with green infrastructure started back in 2011. And as a good science company, we did our research about really understanding what green infrastructure was, looking inside the companies for examples of green infrastructure, and also external. And I sent a few links of the publications. We did some study with the Nature Conservancy because we quickly realized that Dow is a material science company. We understand chemistry. We don't understand nature. And we really wanted that skill set to be embedded with us. So we formed this long-term collaboration. So to go directly to your question, we found that green infrastructure did not resonate well within our company, mainly because engineers, they like to build stuff. And to start with a terminology that says green within Dow, you're already losing the audience for greenwashing. So we decided that we needed to really define for Dow what our journey would be and the best approach to that journey. So we changed the terminology to say engineered natural technology. And it's really about understanding that sometimes hybrid solutions may be the best solution. And so our definition is essentially to recognize the functionalities that nature might bring to Dow from an advantageous asset, right? But also understanding the impacts that we might have and how do we partner with nature in the best way possible.
That's fascinating. So engineered natural ecology is how you would best define green infrastructure.
Engineered natural technology. Again.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's good. Thank you for clarifying. Over to you, Lara or Bailey, whoever wants to go next. Define green infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think when the term green infrastructure was first coined, it really meant what I refer to now as natural infrastructure, just to further separate so there's less confusion. So when I talk about what Alice does, things that grow, right? Trees, grasses, shrubs. That's what we mean when we talk about natural infrastructure, wetlands, that sort of thing. Which have all sorts of benefits in many different ways. And then green infrastructure, if there's some component, like Frans was talking about, of an engineered component. So our natural infrastructure projects sometimes have a green infrastructure component. So once we fence off riparian areas from livestock to help with water quality, we use solar watering systems so the cattle can drink. Or in southwestern Ontario, to help us reach phosphorus reduction targets, there are technologies that we can use to soak up some of the nutrients that are coming off of farmland. So but anyway, the two can work together very well, but our basis is natural, and we use that terminology just so that people understand the basis of what we're doing.
Fascinating. So now we've got two different definitions, but the same. But I'm curious, Bailey, over to you on how you define green infrastructure for KPMG's.
Thanks, Todd. It's an interesting term, and one that is loaded with a lot of different meanings and different perspectives. And to me, when we talk about green infrastructure, we're referring to something which, as Lara said, has an engineered component to it, an element of being managed, which distinguishes it from certain other natural assets. So that element of an engineered component is very important when we talk about green infrastructure. And when we look at the accounting standards, there's a real distinction there between also what is a living asset and what is a non-living asset, and very different requirements there that come into it. So to me, I really focus on that engineered managed element when we talk about what's in the green infrastructure umbrella.
Interesting. Stephen, you must have a ready to go definition for green infrastructure.
Well, the Green Infrastructure Ontario has a broad definition, which I think encapsulates what the other panelists have said. I mean, you can look at green infrastructure in terms of natural systems, coral reefs, forests, prairies, that type of thing, and there's a lot of effort underway right now to protect those areas for the long term due to their multiple ecosystem services. So that's sort of one big category, fairly well established in terms of the work that's being done. So those natural systems have minimal inputs and outputs from a human perspective. And then the other component is the engineered systems, where we're actively involved in either regenerating or creating living systems that are providing ecosystem services. And we're either doing it in the countryside in terms of farms and riparian vegetation, or we're doing it in cities, on buildings, in buildings, the urban forest, where green infrastructure has a lot of benefits to provide human inhabitants directly. And then the third category that we use are the systems that support our ability to have engineering systems, like irrigation systems, like solar water pumping systems, like structural systems to create bioswales. There are a bunch of products and technologies and services, automatic water monitoring and sensoring equipment. There's a bunch of stuff that supports our ability to engineer natural systems for the purposes of getting those ecosystem services. So there's sort of three layers to sort of, if you.
Stephen's joining us from Vancouver, so it's a little early there, and the Wi-Fi is probably not so great. But I think, I'll wrap up what Stephen was going to. Is everybody agrees that what we're talking about today is based on nature and green infrastructure that we typically sometimes hear about renewables, so wind, solar, that it can also be interpreted as green infrastructure, but today I think it's more nature-based infrastructure, and that's a common across all four of your definitions. Welcome back, Stephen. Thanks. I want to jump right into some big news that was in the papers recently. The Farmers for Climate Solutions Group has asked the federal government for $300 million to reduce agriculture emissions by 10 megatons and the greening of farms. And I think this is all ready to go for the feds to approve it as part of their the funding program that they released in December. But I'm really curious from you, Lara, and perhaps France, are you both involved in this Farmers for Climate Solutions group?
We're not a formal member. They're doing some great policy work for sure. The government announced as part of its climate plan that there are over $3 billion available for natural climate solutions. So some of that money is going to Environment and Climate Change Canada, $631 million for a new natural climate solutions fund. There's money going to Agriculture Canada to support working with farmers. And there's also the bulk of the money is going for the 2 billion tree planting program, which should be starting up soon. They've circulated some information to get proposals in. So it's a huge commitment. We're very happy to see that, and of course we're hoping that some of that funding will be coming our way.
And France, any work with that group, or how's Dow going to interact with some of that federal money that's going to flow for things that Laura was just mentioning?
Very good question. I think what we announced recently are carbon neutrality targets for Dow, so June of 2020. So currently, we're in the space of even defining what is allowable as far as carbon credits and voluntary credits in order to offset our facilities. To date, we're really defining our portfolio of projects and what will be amenable. And so I don't have a definite answer for you. We're keeping that in the back of our minds as defining our global strategy. I will say that examples of what we've done in that space would be we have a great partnership with the Olympic Committee, and Dow participated as a carbon partner with the Olympic Committee. And our recent, I'll say, claim to fame was two projects. One was in really quantifying the soil sequestration capacity when performing land improvements in ranching communities in Brazil. And our other one was through reforestation of the Mississippi River area with a partnership with REF, so Restore the Earth Foundation, where we planted cypress trees in order to, again, gain those carbon credits. So with our global view, I'll say we're taking also a global view and tying it to our asset base, I will say.
Yeah, Bailey and Stephen, you want to jump in on the Farmers for Climate Solutions, and is agriculture going to be part of this, natural assets solution in the future?
Yeah, from my perspective, absolutely. I think there's a very important perspective that they bring to the natural assets solution, and I do think it gets very, very interesting as we expand out the different stakeholders that are contributing to this. It brings different solutions and perspectives. So, very positive from my view.
Yeah, and the thing I liked about the announcement, or it wasn't an announcement so much as, request for funding from this group, is they really want to apply artificial intelligence and sensor technology so that we're not using as much water on crops, or we're using them at the right time. We're optimizing yields, all these wonderful things. And I don't know, obviously that's where I was going with, where is Dow and Alice involved, because I know that's the kind of work you both do. So that's good to know. We'll see more of that. I'm going to shift now to more about the natural assets, the word asset. Most people think it's, what's in your RSP, but from this point of view, obviously, we're talking about, our natural assets, and how is that being accounted for? So, since we have an accountant services firm with us, I'm going to shift that over to you, Bailey, in terms of how are we counting our natural assets?
Yeah, it's a great question, Todd. And the simple answer is we're not. We do a terrible job with accounting for our natural assets here in Canada and really internationally. If we look at our accounting standards, we take a very conservative view to what is actually recognized on the balance sheet. We more enable the recognition of the liabilities and the costs related to these. As I mentioned before, with environmental liabilities, contaminated sites, we're quick to put those on book. We see cases where there are lawsuits being filed, and recently there was one around southwestern Ontario regarding the failure of a municipality to maintain a wetland to prevent certain flood damage and flood-related risks. So from an accounting perspective, we get that. We understand that there's a what we call a contingent liability that may occur that could get recognized. What we don't do is we don't recognize those assets. And the reason we don't do that is because they're very, very difficult to measure with a reliable means, and also it's very difficult to demonstrate that we control the benefit, and that's what, from an accounting perspective, you need to show to recognize any asset. But logically, it doesn't make sense when we have a lot of intangible assets, rights, goodwill, complex financial instruments and investments that can fluctuate greatly in value. We put that on our books, but we don't put our natural assets on the books. So there are projects underway to enable that. And other jurisdictions are way ahead of us. South African accounting policies actually support the recognition and the measurement of natural assets. In certain cases, you can disclose them. In other cases, you put them right on your books. In the U.S., the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, which is one of their standard-setting bodies, has also developed guidance around that. Internationally, the Public Sector Accounting Standards Board has a larger project underway to look at what I termed earlier as these living assets. Now, whether we will actually get to the point of having those on book as an asset or just something that we disclose remains to be seen. Right now, the most we can see is when we look at, for example, a town of Gibsons, BC, in their financial statements, in their capital assets note, they provide a paragraph that says, essentially, by the way, we've got all these other natural assets which do provide benefit, but we can't recognize them because the standards don't allow us to. And right now, that's the most we can do in our financial reporting. And my genuine hope is that will evolve and change.
Lara, I'm going to go to you because I know you work directly with farmers and other corporations to value their natural assets. How do you do this with them in terms of making the ROI?
Yeah, so our approach is that we're a payment for ecosystem services program. So we pay farmers. We cover, we cover costs for project installation, and then the farmers or ranchers are paid to manage them on an annual basis. So the value, we had a conversation with CRA about how that could possibly be charitable. And the decision was that because the benefit to society is greater than that which we're paying to the farmers, that there is a public benefit, a large public benefit component of the work that we do. So our program is funded by a mix of funders. We have more than 60 funders from the philanthropic sector, government, and corporate sector. We are shut out of infrastructure funding, though. There are two large federal funding programs: the disaster and mitigation, I'm messing up the name, adaptation fund, and the Investing in Canada plan. You can only fund publicly owned infrastructure under both of those funds. And so we would like to see the definition and accounting rules changed so that when public benefit is achieved on private lands, that federal infrastructure funds there's some other eligibility criteria problems with those funds as well. But the investment for natural climate solutions is very important, and we welcome that, and we hope that that will only grow over time. But really, the natural infrastructure part needs more support, and so opening up infrastructure dollars long term, through the mechanisms that Bailey was talking about is really critical. So we'd like to see those funds change, or at least dedicate a part of those $1 billion funds to a separate fund for natural infrastructure.
That's probably not public, right? So you're looking at private sector use of those funds for common good, for natural infrastructure and green infrastructure that serves a societal benefit. So that's an important distinction. France or Stephen, do you want to weigh in on the financial aspects of natural assets?
Well, to pick up on the comments that just came, I mean, one of the problems is that a lot of the benefits, the ecosystem services that are provided, which are inherently fundamental to our health and well-being, don't get captured. They're not measured very accurately, and even when they are measured, they're not often translated into monetary terms so that we can do the proper accounting. So that's a real challenge, and there's only so far we can go with that in terms of the tools that we've developed. I'll give you an example. Let's say we are doing a redevelopment in downtown, London, Ontario, and there are several parking lots that are underutilized. And the design team decides they want to turn the asphalt, which is contributing to stormwater runoff, and it's contributing to the urban heat island and air pollution. They want to convert one of those asphalt parking lots to a park. Okay. And so we know we can measure how much stormwater we can retain in that park. We can measure the air quality benefits of that park. We can measure the urban heat island reduction from that park. But it's very difficult to measure, for example, the health and well-being that comes to the community because they have this new park asset. It's very difficult to try to get numbers around that have any real weight and standing. So there are some fundamental limitations in our ability to take the ecosystem services and shoehorn them into the economic and financial tools that we're currently using, despite the advances of ecological economics. However, even without that benefit of that park, there's a lot of things like the health benefits of that park. We can make a pretty strong business case for investing a couple of $1 million to turn that parking lot into a park. Because there are a lot of things that we can calculate, like carbon sequestration and the benefit of carbon sequestration. We can calculate the value of the stormwater runoff if there's a regulation that requires building owners to manage stormwater on site. And we've been able to do that to a certain extent, and are continuing to work to develop tools that will enable decision makers at the local level to be able to look at opportunities for regeneration and redevelopment and come up with some numbers, albeit imperfect numbers, but come up with some numbers that make a business case to city councils that, hey, this is a really good investment for the community, and here are all the reasons why, and here are the private and public benefits that are generated. On the federal government side, Green Infrastructure Ontario with others has been lobbying for a dedicated fund. I mean, there are structural problems with the existing infrastructure funding. The bundles are too large. The financial bundles are often too large for the smaller type green infrastructure projects, for example. There's eligibility requirements. Sorry, it's a little early in the morning. Problems. So we do need to recognize that green infrastructure projects aren't all multi-billion-dollar projects. They're not all major highways or bridges. A lot of the times they're smaller aggregates of projects. A lot of the times they're on private land, not public land. And we really need to evolve. There's an opportunity right now to evolve to a better approach so that when we as taxpayers invest in green and infrastructure in our country, we know we're getting the best bang for our buck. Because we know that green infrastructure, particularly green infrastructure in cities where people live, delivers more benefits, per square meter of leafy green space than anything else that we can possibly imagine, whether it's on a roof or a bioswale or the urban forest or the neighborhood park. And there's a hunger for that politically right now with the pandemic. People are realizing how important it is to have healthy green space in their communities. So we really need to not pay lip service, because we're not talking about 10 or 15 or 20 million dollars. We're talking billions of dollars need to be spent on green infrastructure, particularly in urban areas across the country. And having a dedicated fund that sets aside, some of the tens of billions of dollars, 15% is what we've been asking for, would go a long way to creating a lot of employment. Because these are more mom and pop shop type, they're not large corporations, and we're not importing goods and services. A lot of the green infrastructure development work is done regionally and locally, so there's a lot of jobs per dollar spent right across the board when you invest in green infrastructure. And hopefully the federal government is getting that message, and we're going to see more movement in that direction over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think that echoes what Laura was saying in terms of changing the way the federal government perceives funding for green infrastructure and getting that to the right place, because the multiplier effects are there, as you've mentioned. I'm going to turn to you, France, because this is relevant. You've done some life cycle analysis of wetlands, financial analysis. So is this kind of where we're getting to, where we can actually put some numbers on the table to demonstrate the value of natural asset investments?
So I'll say that I'll be very transparent. So our focus on green infrastructure and natural technology that started back in 2011, and I've seen a huge transformation just across the 10 years with how our personal company is coming around to recognizing the co-benefits. Right, because in the first instance where we introduced our nature goal back in 2015, so after making that business case for Dow, right, after convincing us that green infrastructure had real opportunities, and that goes back to the study of that wetland. So back in 1995, I'll say a forward-thinking engineer decided to build a wetland as a polishing unit in the flow of our wastewater treatment. So the story back when that was built is that it saved us $15 million in capital. But when we first wanted to engage with green infrastructure, we said, well, let's look at that project, but back in 2011, and really do a retrospective financial analysis. And also do, in accounting, do a replacement cost methodology. So how did that wetland compare in 2011 to a sequential batch reactor, which would have been the gray traditional? So what we found, strictly benefit to Dow. So forget about this co-benefits yet. Strictly benefits to Dow. What we found is the value of that project in NPV was $280 million. So, but that again is strictly benefit to Dow. Now, I'll give you another example. More recently, we've built we had an ash pond that we needed to remediate in Midland, Michigan, along the Tibuwassee River. The traditional solution there would have been to cap and treat that site, right? Make sure the water that had potential contamination with arsenic from the ash would never enter the river. And then it would have been on Dow's books forever. And we would have been responsible for treatment of any rainwater falling into forever as well. And without access to the community, to that land. What we did is we piloted a tool that Dow developed, and it's all about quantifying ecosystem services that a property can deliver. And that's an internal tool to Dow, but it's also available publicly. It was developed with the Nature Conservancy. So we challenged that project team along with that easy tool at hand, right? And said, well, if I look at the site today, that ash pond was overtaken by nature. It was a beautiful wetland in reality. So the cap and treat would have decreased all of the ecosystem services that the site had today. So we challenged the team and said, well, you can't do that. So think of something else. So we decided to look at the possibility of excavating the ash that was causing the concern, putting that into a secure site not along the river, turn the site into a wetland, with annex community access to it, and a riparian buffer along the river, and save $2 million, again, benefits to Dow only. Now the community, actually 6 months after we installed it, there was a huge flood, and the downstream community benefited from that wetland, right? Compared to the cap and treat. We did not value that in our equation, but I'm super excited because we're working now at developing tools with external bodies on the concept of stacked benefit. So not only water, but carbon, habitat improvement, biodiversity improvement. And it's to come to a project and say, well, Dow, I'm ready to clean that wetland up. I have to do it anyways, right? What else can we bring in? Who else can we bring into the table that is ready to pay for those stacked benefits? From a project management standpoint. The other issues is I see that the regulatory and policy work that needs to occur. I'll say that one element that Dow was concerned about with, it alluded back to those co-benefits, right? Is, well, if Dow builds a wetland and and the flow of benefits goes off to the wetland, am I then legally responsible for supplying that level of benefits forever? That's a big question for a company. So there's a lot of policy and regulatory work that needs to occur to propel that and allow the correct solutions to be put in place, I will say.
That's interesting. That all blends into the practice of asset management. You're looking at life cycle analysis, but you're also looking at levels of service. Once you put in a piece of green infrastructure, whether it's a constructed wetland or pervious pavement, there is a level of service that is then expected from that. So let's shift to project discussion. Lara, I'm going to turn it over to you. And it's one of our questions actually is, give us some examples of projects that you've been working on that you think are exciting or worth mentioning.
So we've got two natural infrastructure pilot projects. One is in the Lake Erie Basin. The other is upstream of Edmonton. So in both cases, we're working with University of Guelph to model the level to which we need to rebuild nature to reach certain outcomes. So Lake Erie, as all of your readers and members, of course, would know, has the problem with phosphorus and algal blooms. We know that those are costing Canada, hard numbers of $6 billion over the next 30 years. So that's in terms of commercial fisheries, tourism, and water treatment. So we need to remediate the lake. It's important for our economy. It's important for our health. So this project that we're looking at is going to give us some numbers as to how we can influence the reduction of phosphorus going into Lake Erie, as well as funding more natural infrastructure reconstruction in the basin. In Alberta, our natural infrastructure pilot project is using the same sort of modeling, but we're working closely with City of Edmonton and EPCOR, which is the water utility, as well as our rural municipalities, where Alice is established in that part of the watershed. And what we understand, which I think applies for much of rural Canada, is that the rural municipality benefits of reconstructing natural infrastructure are twofold. One is in terms of roads. So with the increasing wear and tear from climate change events and land use changes in the past, a lot of municipal budgets are going to repairing roads, culvert blowouts, damages to bridge, having to resurface. So we can save municipalities a lot of money. One of our staff people at Alice used to work as a CAO at a rural municipality in Alberta. She said close to 80% of their municipal budget was related to road construction and maintenance. So if we can reduce that figure, that goes a long way to pay for natural infrastructure reconstruction. And of course, out in Western Canada, a lot of communities rely on surface water for their drinking water and other needs. And so if we can keep what's through soil protection, reducing soil erosion, and keeping nutrients on farm fields rather than going into riparian areas, creeks, streams, and rivers, then we can really reduce water treatment costs significantly. And that goes a long way to paying for natural infrastructure as well. So, I think that avoided costs are always palatable when you're talking to decision makers. And the more evidence that we can have about what the cost benefits are of reconstruction, the more successful we'll be in redirecting funds to green and natural infrastructure.
It goes back to the stacked benefits that France was talking about it, and I guess what we need to do is quantify all these benefits so that they actually sit somewhere on either a municipal balance sheet or on a private sector balance sheet. And I think that's coming, with some of the ESG requirements that our corporations are having to face. And I think, over to Bailey on terms of how this is going to be tracked from a public sector accounting point of view, because I think under PSAB 3150, that's asset management lingo for those of you who don't know, we do need to put natural assets on the books of municipalities. And I think that would really help folks like Alice and Dow and others to partner with government organizations. So can we get into that a little bit more? Because I know Ottawa's counting trees, for example, and they figured out that an elm tree has a $2,000 value because of its carbon sequestration and oxygen benefits. And so where are we getting with this from a pure accounting point?
Yeah, it's a great question, Todd. We are at a point where we have lots of data points that can inform that measurement, and you're exactly right with the disclosures around various ESG initiatives. There's a strong interest there in having related information on natural assets that are in other supplemental disclosures and other things that accompany the financial statements. But we still have a gap in the actual financial statements themselves that will take some real considerable effort to to get around. And there's a definite bias there in how we do financial reporting. To the example that France shared earlier, where you construct that water treatment plant, and say you spend $100 million on that water treatment plant, our accounting standards enable you to set that up as an asset, and it sits on your balance sheet, and it shows to other users, it shows to credit rating agencies that you've got a stronger asset base. You spend that exact same money on a managed wetlands project that does the exact same thing, even better. In fact, it even provides more future economic benefit. And even though we've got the measurement indicators and the data points, we can't put that on our balance sheet. So if you're a government looking at how do I best enhance my financial position? How do I look the strongest to the public, to the stakeholders? Which one are you going to invest in? And that's the inherent bias that we have in how we do our accounting and reporting. I believe that where we are going to move to is first a point of having some guidance from a what I'll call a supplemental disclosures perspective. I don't think we will get it in the financial statements, even in the notes to the financial statements for a while, because the moment we put it in the notes to the financial statements, an auditor has to be able to audit it. And it gets very difficult where for a lot of these assets, we are using a different basis than what our accounting framework calls for, which is the good old historical cost basis. You record it on your books at the historical cost it was to you to acquire or develop that asset. Other value measures aren't envisioned in our accounting framework. So that's a battle. The other battle is on proving that we can recognize that there is a future benefit that we can control. And that's another thing that we've got to show. So I think supplemental disclosures and other information will be where public sector entities will first be moving to. I think we will see guidance developing, just like with the broader ESG initiatives around that. The most important thing in my mind for all public sector entities to be doing is to be building the processes and the data behind it. Right now, we've got some good measurement approaches, but it's going to be really, really important that those have adequate rigor, adequate process behind them, so that when we do get the green light from the accounting standards, those can be audited and those can go in the financial statements. So building that whole process is going to be really critical.
Yeah, no pun intended with green light. I think there is definitely some need from the accounting profession to make sure this happens, because there's a lot of benefits, the stack benefits, the avoided costs. All these things have to be included on our balance sheets, and not. So we'll have to change the way accounting does that, and not the way we're talking about it, I think. But
Exactly.
let's shift now to the polls. And everybody on the call, please take your time right now to go into polls, complete them, and then I'm just going to walk through that, because I think it's informative when we get some feedback from everybody, and we'll have some Q&A from this. So not everybody has voted, but looks like when we ask what kind of green infrastructure projects should we be doing more of in Canada, all the above. That's an obvious one. But I think it seems like constructed wetlands is getting some more votes. Nobody wanted permeable pavement. That was one of mine that I put in there. I thought that was important to kind of do that. It's pretty easy. The cement industry and others are all over that. So it's an opportunity to work with the private sector to avoid that stormwater problem. So that's interesting. Stephen, we only got 3 for green roofs. You're going to have to get into the constructed wetlands business, my friend.
We still have we still have a ways to go to educate about the benefits of green roofs. I think.
Yeah,
They're quite amazing technology.
And the cost too. I think this is all kind of part of what we're talking about today. Is sometimes people think natural assets and green infrastructure is more costly than the regular way of doing things, and that goes back to accounting to prove that in fact it is more economical to do what we've been talking about than to do it as a gray infrastructure.
The other thing about it is, like, when you're doing measurements and so forth, one of the challenges is that a lot of institutions, particularly, for example, water, wastewater institutions, they'll only look at cost per liter of water, treated, and all the other stack benefits that France was talking about. They don't get factored in to the analysis. And so permeable pavement wins because it's the lowest cost per gallon or liter of stormwater managed. But in terms of, market penetration potential, overall, health benefits, biodiversity, all these other benefits, they miss the boat in terms of what it is, but they have their sort of jurisdictional blinders on, and they are only sort of able to look at, one little benefit parameter. And so they hamstring green infrastructure. And it's not just them, but other institutions do it, but they tend to hamstring green infrastructure benefits into a little box and then discount them.
Yeah. So, it goes back to, we haven't done it that way before, so why should we start now? Mentality, which we're all trying to change, of course. So the next poll question was, what percentage of federal funding do you think is dedicated to living green infrastructure? And so this is a guess because we're going to get the answer soon. I think, Stephen, you've got the answer to this. Looks like most people thought it was 1 to 10%. What's the answer here?
Well, I think that the answer is it's moving around. Laura, there's been some expenditure recently, right, around green infrastructure, dedicated green infrastructure, the TREE program and so forth. But from an institutional perspective, it's mostly gray infrastructure, and there's a lot of concerns right now that federal infrastructure dollars are going to, in fact, support highway development across the green belt in Ontario and actually damage farmland, destroy farmland and wetlands in Ontario right now, and a concern. So the flip side of that is how much green infrastructure investment is actually damaging our green infrastructure assets. And the positive would be how much of it's actually supporting, and we need to limit the damage on the one hand and improve the regeneration and restoration and engineering green infrastructure on the other. So it's sort of two sides of the coin.
So the answer is, how much is being dedicated right now?
It's about 0%.
It's about 0%
on the positive side, and we don't know what the percentage on the negative side is. A lot of big concerns about Terminal 3 and its impact on Vancouver. If this money goes into investing in infrastructure projects that are going to continue to draw down our natural or green infrastructure in the country, that's a real negative as well.
Yeah, so we're going to get close to here. Maybe Lara, you can talk a little bit about what you think is the right percentage of funding that should be coming from the federal government. You mentioned earlier that Alice is working primarily with farmers and ranchers who are private sector owners. So how do you envision the federal government supporting what they're doing to protect their natural assets?
Yeah, I do think. It's not hard to go up from zero, right? So it is important that these funds are structured so that they actually incorporate the living part of green or natural infrastructure, because of course green infrastructure includes transit in a lot of programs, right? So we actually need to make sure that it's split up to include the sort of things that we're talking about here. But it is, other countries are way ahead of us, as I think Bailey and the other panelists have mentioned. So I think there's a lot to learn, and there's maybe a misconception in Canada that we've got so much nature that we don't need to be rebuilding. But in Southern Canada, that's certainly not the case. There's lots of economic benefits to having the right mix between green and natural and built infrastructure. And the green natural infrastructure will extend the longevity of our built infrastructure, and that's really important as well.
So what was what was the number then, Laura? do you have a number?
I don't know. Up from zero sounds good to me, right? It's so much cheaper than built infrastructure. Even if we got 5%, which seems like nothing, we would be able to do a lot of work. So I don't know. I'm not going to throw anything out there. Yep.
Well, maybe I'll turn it over to the editorial team at Renew to kind of come up with some percentages that we think, and then actually delineate that percentage of funding to real projects. And I know, France, you talked about some real projects. Stephen, you talked about some good projects in municipalities, and Laura, you're working on them as well. So maybe what we need to do is do a summary of valuable projects that actually produce those stacked benefits and those hidden costs, avoid hidden costs.
And don't include wastewater treatment plants as green infrastructure. That's a big part of it, Todd.
Yeah, but going back to that, I mean, if a wastewater treatment plant has a constructed wetland, is that not green infrastructure?
Well, I wouldn't call a constructed wetland a wastewater treatment plant.
But if it's part of your tertiary treatment, it is.
That's a different animal. That's a living machine. That's Todd, John Todd. That stuff goes back 35, 40 years, that technology,
Yeah, so I guess part of all this is advancing new technologies, not necessarily doing what we did before and just putting a green label on it. Right.
Exactly.
Well, I think you alluded it to before, Todd. I think it's how we approach it is because you can really get into huge battles, right? What's gray, what's green. The way that we like to approach it is to do a life cycle assessment and really quantify, what is the actual benefit to nature as well. So we've developed a nature scorecard that you do your life cycle assessment, you do your quantification of ecosystem services, and then the data speaks in itself in where the benefit occurs. And I think we really have to also broaden the boundaries of who and where does the benefit occur. Within our nature goal, I couldn't care less where the nature benefit occurs. Somewhere it's benefiting nature, then I'm okay to count it towards our goal of $1 billion of projects that are better for nature, but show a positive value, again, strictly to Dow. I think we would benefit because green infrastructure in a way is novel. And in order for it to advance, right, you have to bring in these case studies and you have to do your pilot studies. You have to understand that when I build a wetland, I'm building an infrastructure project that instead of losing value every year, like a pump and a piece of concrete, it actually increases in value because the biodiversity that is there continues to grow. The wetland example that I gave you back in 1995, that was built, it was accounted for 25 years in value, but we're surpassed that, and it's still it survived the hurricane. So to me, that's what needs to be accounted for.
Yeah, I like your idea of a scorecard. I think that fits in well with what Canada's already doing with its infrastructure report card. Maybe we need to put a natural assets category in there and start scoring not only municipalities but provincial jurisdictions on how they're doing with natural assets. We're running at the end of our time here. Wanted to give each of you literally 5-10 seconds each to have a closing sort of what do we need to do next? What are the action items now? I'll start with you, Stephen.
We need to see more infrastructure dollars dedicated to living green infrastructure systems, and I would argue in cities in particular, mid to large cities across Canada would be an area to focus the engineered component of that. And we need we're going to get a lot of bang for our buck in terms of jobs and health and well-being and resiliency if we do that.
Bailey.
We need to have transparency around our green infrastructure on our public sector financial statements. It's absolutely critical that we have a clear line of sight on the value that these assets bring, as well as a clear line of sight on our responsibilities for properly managing these assets, for recognizing where there are potential impairments to these assets. We do it so well now with other things like complex financial instruments. We don't do it well with natural assets. I'm
Franz?
really encouraged.
Thanks, Bailey. Franz?
I think
One
it's
action item. What do we need to do?
make the business case for nature. So bring up your, look at it through not a nature lens, but what's the business case for it? That will push dollars.
And Lara, final words on what's next and what do we need to do?
Yeah, I agree with all the other speakers. We need to increase resources for the players who are active in this right now. So that includes groups like Alice, but watershed districts, conservation authorities, people that are actually rebuilding natural infrastructure and making the case for it as well.
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate you being on with us. Again, thank you to Alice for supporting this. We're going to do a summary of all this in our next issue of Renew Canada. And we're going to be live back here again on March 25th, I believe. I think then part of the poll questions was asking if you would like to be signed up for that. So we will be doing that next month. And so that's it for me. Thank you very much for attending. A replay of this will be on your screen within about 10 minutes or less. You can log back in. You can also find the replay of this and all of our past webinars, including those that we've done on the Blue Economy for Water Canada, and they can be found on our YouTube channel, which can be linked through websites. So thank you, everybody, and thank you all who were here and posed questions. I think it was a great conversation, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.